It had been a shock that came gradually and lasted for weeks. As they'd ridden on that train, surrounded by the average Dardanians, they couldn't see the expected hostility, distance, or coldness. All they saw were tired people, excited to go back home and rest. Instead of talking about the cult of Insere, the iron discipline, and the mistrust towards the rest of the world, they discussed grocery shopping and dinner plans and health problems. Despite the many cultural differences that would come to light later on the most basic level, they were not that different from the people who lived on the other side of the pass. That realization was slowly sinking in when the train stopped and it was time to make the choice. Do they trust Zin? In the face of the challenges ahead, the risk turned more into a necessity. Yes, sometimes people would reach out to the needy because they were an easy target for malice. And true enough, it often worked when the needy could not afford to be careful. And that was the situation Sistroy and Cyan were in. They couldn't afford it, and so they followed Zin. Maybe most humans were innately good, or maybe it was a mere coin flip, but he did not deceive them. He took them to the Arata, Dardanus underground that spanned throughout the majority of the Hadan sector. Hubs were connected by a slow trolley that went partially underground and partially above it. It was here that the lower caste of the Dardanian society made a life for themselves. Naturally sheltered from the winds, heated by the warmth coming from the amethyst installations around the crop fields. Working together, they made do. Sistroya learned to love Dardanian's sense of humor. It was so dark that when you embraced it, life had nothing to scare you with anymore. Cyan, speak to me, Sistroya thumped on the wall with her hand. Please. Are you afraid? He asked. He sounded normal, quiet, poignant, but normal. Of what? Have they done something to you? No, don't worry about me. How can I not worry about you? Cyan, you're freaking me out. Stop it. Cyan tapped on the wall back in response. I'm sorry. I needed a moment. For what? He could be so frustrating. Always going silent to rethink shit before speaking up, while she was going out of her mind. Are you afraid of leaving? Here? Of course! Sistroya got up on her knees and pressed her body against the cold wall separating their cells. In her mind she could feel Cyan's heartbeat resonating through the stones and matching her own. But we've survived worse than regaining our freedom. We'll be fine. Why do you ask now? You are my everything, you know that, right? And I don't mean that I love you most of all. I mean you are the only thing that I love. You give meaning to everything else. Cyan, what's wrong? What are you not telling me? The panic was growing anew. Don't protect me from whatever it is. You know you don't need to. I know. And I can't, even if I wanted to. Cyan? He asked. What was the moment when it all stopped feeling temporary to you? The same as yours, I bet, she said. Zin had done his best to give them a chance at a good life, and they could never repay him for everything he'd done for them. Not only did he find a room in Aleja they could share, small as it was, he taught them a craft and made sure they could stand on their own 2 feet in the local society. If a Dardanian escaped to the outer world, they'd feel like an outsider for years, if not forever. But here, few weeks in, nobody treated foreigners any different. As long as you accepted their rules, they accepted you. To avoid unnecessary explanations, they took on common Dardanian names of Ligren and Kir. Knowing that she could trust Zin, Sestroya told him eventually about their search for Agare. Given that the wanted man was a mage, they had to find a way to ask about him above. Zin taught them to herd rumas and weave their wool into carpets, which could be peddled to the rich living on the surface. Knowing designs from abroad was incredibly helpful in this profession, and an amazing source of inspiration that, given time, could get them pretty far. For an Arata citizen, of course. Sestroya and Sion headed down into the basement, where they had their workshop and looms. The rumas would be ready for shearing next month, so it was time to start finishing off their last carpets. Sestroya glanced over to the one still on the loom, but then decided against it for now, and instead unrolled another unfinished piece. It was a big one, so Sion helped her lay it down evenly on the floor and lowered the light bulb so they could take a good look at the thing. The dilemma was the coloring, and it's been going on for weeks. Sion came over to Sestroya's side and said, "Well, it's time to make a decision. I know this one's your baby, but it's time for it to grow up." "Easy for you to say." Sestroya turned to pout at him, but he was close. So close. Too close. She tried to take a step back, but Sion stopped her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "I can't pretend anymore," he said. "I don't want to." 3 years. For 3 years, she'd been imagining this moment. And now that it happened, she found herself at a loss for words. But Sion knew well that she felt the same, so he would not release her from this embrace, and Sestroya could let it last. Make up for all the times this fantasy had left her cold. Eventually, though, she had to speak. So she said, "I never wanted to." Sion leant in and whispered to her ear. "It felt wrong, because it's temporary." "So it is. Who cares, Sion? I don't. Screw permanence. We are here today, and I feel real. I love you," he said. Sestroya smiled and pressed a finger to his lips. Before he could kiss her, she told him, "I don't remember a time where I did not love you." They were gorgeous, alluring, beguiling. Their beauty was a testament to how stress could blind humans to the world around them, or even forbid them from looking at all. Inceres lights spilled over the sky, and the celebrations began. The one night when everyone from Arata climbed above. Their neighbor Okara's twins were running around the Leha, doing everything in their power to rush everyone's preparations and get moving. When everyone was ready, the families would gather around the nearest marketplace and then embark together towards the stairway. Elevators had to be left only for the disabled. "Ligren!" Bear screamed from the other side of the door. "How much longer?" "Every time I have to answer you, it slows me down," Sestroya answered the boy and earned an annoyed groan. Sion was struggling to get his attire to look decent. Dardanians didn't have many customs or traditions. They usually didn't have the mind or time to bother with such things. But the first night of lights was an exception. And when they made an exception, they made it right. Clothes were specifically sewn and had to be fitted tight around the body. Hair, similarly flat against the head, braided or oiled if need be. The only acceptable color was black, and every glimmer of personal style had to go. At first Sestroya thought it was a depressing show of Dardanian conformity, but when they got outside, she understood. In the crowd of people, muted, dressed in black, everyone was indistinguishable, the rich, the poor, the beautiful, the ugly. All together, they created a dark sea, upon which reflected the fiery hues of the auroras. Beyond the silver cord, the blood was being spilled, and the skylights were nothing but a bad omen. But here, people celebrated their beauty. They raised their hands up and chanted prayers to the long-gone goddess, asking for her blessing and her return. The faint smell of cornine filled the air, as those who could afford the extremely expensive drug began to smoke it. The visions would take them soon. With no scorch, carnine was a luxury. It was grown in tiny pots fueled by amethyst cores, charged by mages, every minute of every day. Okara grabbed Jian and hoisted her up on her shoulders. The girl, who had never seen the lights before, was trying to touch the sky. "I can still go get Kumi, you know," Cyan whispered to Sestroya. He liked teasing her about treating the baby Ruma like a human child about as much as she loved to cuddle the thing. It was hard to deny she became a little obsessed with the cutie, but the obsession did not yet turn into insanity. Yet. Sestroya stuck out her tongue at Cyan, and he put an arm around her shoulders to pull her closer. They had talked about having children. Of course they had. It had been 6 years since they'd first entered Dardenne. It was impossible to avoid the subject for that long. But it wasn't truly a choice. Their quest would end with the erasure of this reality. Having to undo your own child's existence was madness. And after all it would take to make this reality permanent was for the two of them to decide that it was to be so.